Good morning, dear friends. Today is Sunday, Rosh Chodesh Elul, August 8th. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. At this moment, we are studying Meseches.
Today's Rosh Chodesh.
Today is the 30th of the final day of Av, and it's Rosh Chodesh Elul. Today and tomorrow are Rosh Chodesh. And so it's more than appropriate that we're studying a little Gemara, a little Torah. Today we're studying Meseches Shabbos, chapter 7. And we are on page 69B. And in a moment, 70A. So again, a good Chodesh to all of you out there. For those that will be joining us virtually, whatever time it is, get the channel into this holy day of Rosh Chodesh. And different societies have different ways of experiencing Chodesh El or Rosh Chodesh El. But we know it's an important time. And in Hasidic thought, before we get into the Gemara, in Hasidic thought, this is a time of Rachamim. It's a time that Hashem makes himself uniquely accessible to all of Klal Yisrael. So although Chodesh Elul for some reason has associated imagery of scary times and somber times, it's more like a very, very serious time. The way I try to think of it, the Baal Tanya describes the story of a king in a field making himself accessible. But the way I look at it is like when you have one of those shopping sprees. You know, they tell you have
Today's Rosh Chodesh.
You know how they have these like contests or prizes where you get like an hour shopping spree in the mall and you could like take whatever you want, but you only have 1 hour or 10 minutes or whatever it is. So is it scary before you have one of those shopping sprees? Are you scared?
What?
Only that you might not maximize your opportunity. And so the way I understand Chodesh Elul is it's kind of like one of those shopping sprees. Hashem is saying, just try.
I can't hear you.
Just try, and we're going to have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Just try and add in Torah and in Tefillah and in Tzedakah and in all the important, valuable Jewish things that bring us closer. And the sky is the limit. I muted everyone, but please feel free to unmute for questions or comments. And it's good to welcome our Levium and our Lamerians and our Hallandale residents and our Yisraelim, all the holy Jews. We're going to do a shorter than usual shir, but it's pretty important. It's an important shir. So again, if you have any comments, you're welcome to unmute. I'm meanwhile going to get to sharing the screen, and you'll please let me know if all appears as it ought to, and we'll get started. Samach.
It's fine.
Good. All right. Samach Tes Amud Bey 69B, very bottom of the page. Just to remind you, we had a glorious detour on Friday. Friday, we spoke of the fascinating question: what do you do if you get lost? Or I'll tell you the funny thing. I understand it as you must have been lost, the deserted island, or but in truth, if you look in the Gemara, if you read what the Gemara seems to be talking about, and if you read the language of the Shulchan Aruch, and then on Shabbos I was also peeking at the language of the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Baal Tanya's, the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, and it's clear that a person might be on a shayara, on a how do you call it? On a caravan. And so that's why, like in my 21st century perspective, I'm like, okay, so then you just ask the person traveling next to you what today is. Why are you so confused? But it seems like in those days, maybe not everyone measured time the same way, or maybe you don't just want to strike up a conversation. I don't know exactly how a person would come into such a circumstance, but it seems like in the ancient world or the old world, it wasn't all that far-fetched for a person to potentially lose track of time. Again, especially if their iPhone ran out of battery, ran out of juice, then you're in trouble. That was Friday's Gemara. Today, we're going to go back to some basic questions. As you may recall, our Mishnah talks about different ways that a person could forget that it is Shabbos, or forget that there are certain appropriate Shabbos behaviors. And depending on the nature of one's forgetfulness, or depending on the nature of the inadvertentness, I know that's not I don't believe that's a word, but depending on how it unfolds, may influence how many karbanot, how many offerings sin offerings a person brings in atonement for these mistakes. And so the Mishnah brings a series of scenarios, and the Gemara wants to know, what's your source? How do you know that you could have two people doing the same actions, and one might have to bring multiple karbanot because they've essentially desecrated a Shabbos many times, and then another person could do the very same activities but would only have to bring a single carbon for a single atonement? How do you know that there are different ways or different calculations of how a person might be, or how many offerings a person might be chayav to bring? So here we go. To our Gemara, if you see where my cursor is, again, this is the very bottom of Samach Tes Amud Beis. Our Mishnah says, Hayodeya Iker Shabbos. A person knows the concept of Shabbos. And so what doesn't he know? Who remembers the lashon of the Mishnah? Hayodeya Iker Shabbos. I just want to tell you the language inside. The Asa Malacha is Harba, the Shabbos is Harba. He knows of the existence of Shabbos, but he forgot today is Shabbos, right? So the Gemara asks, Mina Hani Mili. How do I know? How do I know? Let's see Rashi. Shiyesh Mechala b'Shabbos is Harba v'chayiv achas al kulon. You could have one person who desecrates multiple Shabbosos, and he only has to do a single atonement. Yesh mechalon v'chayav al kol Shabbos v'Shabbos. And there are others who, when they do know about Shabbos, would have to bring an offering for every Shabbos that they were not observing Shabbos. You know, Hani Mili, how do I know that there are actually different configurations? So I may have explained this a little bit different than Rashi does. So just to back up again, I was getting ahead of myself. Our Mishnah starts off, you might not know all about Shabbos or have forgotten all about the idea of Shabbos, and then you want to bring one offering for multiple Shabbos. Now, if you know about the concept of Shabbos, but you forget when Shabbos is, so then every Shabbos would need its own carbon. Manani Mili, how do I know this? Is there a verse in the Torah that indicates that there are different ways that a person might find themselves atoning for Shabbos? Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua. So Rav Nachman taught what Rabba bar Avua taught, which is as follows: Shrei Kirayi Ksivi. There are two different biblical verses referencing Shabbos, and right away I'm just going to open these two texts over here, and I want to thank Sefaria and those who make Sefaria possible, because this is a pretty awesome resource as always. Shrei Kirayi Ksivi. There are two psukim. One that we know very well, Kiddush, 10 Commandments, I believe. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael es haShabbos. The children of Israel will observe Shabbat, singular. Here we go. Language of the 10 Commandments. We read it not long ago in Veschanon, but here it is in Yisrael. Here is the whole language. Sheishes yamim yasem alacha uvayom hashvi Shabbat Shabbos and Kodesh Tashem. 6 days do work, and the 7th day it is a resting day for Hashem. And if you do work intentionally, right? What's the punishment for an intentional with warning? And the verse continues: Vishamru b'nei Yisrael es Shabbos. The Jewish people shall keep Shabbos. Lashlois is a Shabbos of the Roisam, to do Shabbos throughout the ages, throughout all the generations. Bris Olam, an eternal covenant. Etc. But what's interesting for us is the Shamru b'nei Yisrael es ha-Shabbat. Now, how many Shabboses are there? Reb Beryl, how many Shabboses are there?
Well, according to the calendar, we have depends what year. You have 12 times 4, or 13 times 4.
Okay, so what does that come to be?
Either 48 or 52.
Okay. So we have between 48 and 52 Shabbats a year. So what's going on over here? Shabbat. Why does it keep the Shabbos? Which one? You got 48 to 52 a year. Shkoyach Reb Beryl for the math. But it's singular. And then that's one pasuk. Uksiv, and then another verse says, "Ve'es shab to tai tishmoru," and here's in Vayikra, Parshas Bahar, last line. Et shab to tai tishmoru, umikdashi tiro. Observe my Shabbats. Fear, honor the mikdash ani Hashem. This is the pasuk in Bahar. Hold on one second. Just curious if anybody here quotes this Gemara. All right. So there's two ways that Shabbos is expressed, singular and plural. And it's both with the word vishamru, watching. Shamru, they watch Shabbos, or watch the Shabboses. Hakeitzad, the Gemara says, what is it? How do we describe Shabbos? Is Shabbos an institution that reverts every Shabbos? Or is it a weekly event? Hakeitzad v'shama b'nei Yisrael Shabbos. So here's how it works. The verse from the Ten Commandments teaches us, Shmira achas l'shabbosos harbe. It is plausible that there could be a single mandate to observe many Shabbats, and when that single mandate is broken, one offering needs to be brought. Tishmoru, watch all of my Shabboses. Here we see that sometimes Shmira achas l'chol Shabbos v'Shabbos, every Shabbos is its own mitzvah. When it's broken, it would need a carbon for each one. Let's see how let's see Rashi. The Kra Kama, the first verse, Chada Shabbos Hu D'Choshev, it mentions as if there's a single institution of Shabbos. Mashma Sheni Makbid Ela Al Ha'achas, as if there's only a single issue. And here it sounds like there are many different Shabbos that Hashem is concerned about. And the rabbis are empowered to decipher these two psukim with their rationale to explain. If a person forgot all about Shabbos, what is his inadvertent sin? He doesn't know about the Shabbat. It's a single mistake. He didn't know about Shabbat. And so when he finds out that you got to keep the Shabbat, he brings one carbon for all the Shabbats that he didn't know about. But when you forget that today is Shabbos, but you know about the notion of Shabbos, well then, being that there are days in between each sin, each mistake, that's considered like a yediyah, like an awareness that there's Shabbos, and therefore you have to bring multiple karbanis. Anyways,
I'm surprised, Rabbi, that we don't try to learn this out from the difference from Shamor and Zachor.
why?
Because Zachor, to me, would mean you'd get away with one carbon, and Shomer would be for every Shabbos.
I like the theory, but I'll explain to you why that doesn't work.
Probably off the wall.
No, it's not off the wall. It's a good idea, but I'll tell you. Zachor usually is talking about the mitzvah saseh, the positive elements of Shabbos. Zachreu b'kiddush. It's how we observe Shabbos positively. Shamor typically is a reference to not desecrating Shabbos. So the word Shamor is going to be associated with Chilul Shabbos and the atonements thereof. And so for that reason, Zachor is not considered to be a reference to, at least as I understand it, it's not considered to be a reference to the desecration of Shabbos. It's because, as we know, Shabbos has the don'ts and the do's. And one of the great tragedies of Judaism in the early immigrant story in America is that the immigrants that came to New York and across the country, 1880, 1890, till 1930s, and beyond, but particularly in those times, the immigrants were so busy surviving that they didn't have the opportunity to imbue Shabbos to their kids. And if they did, it was mostly where they shouldn't go and what they shouldn't do. And I have personally spoken to an individual or the children of an individual who abandoned or felt disappointed by their religion, because to them, all Shabbos meant is they weren't allowed to go to the Dodgers game. Have you ever met somebody that had that relationship with Shabbos? And so Shabbos does have the don'ts, but Shabbos also has to have the do's. And again, certainly we're not blaming those immigrants. Their life was certainly not a walk in the park, but that we can't divorce Shamor from Zachor. There needs to be the don'ts and there needs to be the do's. So anyways, here is the initial explanation. Why do you have different configurations of how to atone for the desecration of Shabbos? Well, because sometimes you're doing a single teshuvah for Shabbat, and sometimes every Shabbos warrants its own teshuvah. The Chachamim explain why sometimes one Shabbat, many Shabbats. It depends if you know about Shabbos or not. That's how they explain it. Maskef Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak challenges these rabbis and says, Adarabba Ipcha Mistabra. The opposite makes sense. And by the way, in yeshivish language, the word Ipcha Mistabra, which means the opposite, makes sense. And an Ipcha Mistabranik, a person who always has to say the opposite, stem from this word, Ipcha Mistabra. The opposite makes sense. How to explain this? I'm sorry?
Yiddish says it best. Agonzur Shikker Pirim Nichter.
Exactly. A person who's always doing the opposite, going against traffic. So what Rabbeinu said is that all year he's drinking, and then when it comes to, you said some Chas Torah or Purim, right? Then Purim, which there's a mitzvah to have a degree of intoxication, then he's all sober. So that's an Ipcha Mistabra. Very well, Baruch Shkoyach. Ipcha Mistabra, I would see this opposite. But of course, in this context, we're not calling out Rav Nachman. On the contrary, this is a important and beautiful intellectual exercise and a Torah and analytical exercise that we're going to have the thrill of going through. Ipcha Mistabra. I see it the opposite. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat. The Jewish children should keep Shabbos. I see a shamru, a shmira, an atonement for every single individual Shabbos. Shmira achas l'chol Shabbos v'Shabbos. Every Shabbos has to be kept, and if God forbid we fail to do so, each Shabbos would get its own carbon. That Shabtotai tishmoiru. But when there's a command to guard all the Shabbats, that would mean shmira achas l'Shabbatot harbei. You could have a single prohibition and a single breach of many Shabbats with a single word shmira, and therefore one carbon would cover many Shabbats. And by the way, folks, if you read that through and you think it through, it's a compelling argument. Let's read Rashi. Ipcha Mistabra. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael es ha-Shabbos. Mashma shmira achas l'Shabbos achas. It's like every Shabbos needs its own kind of shmira. Multiple plural Shabbos with a single shmira. Ubein Rav Nachman. Ubein Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Both Rav Nachmans are not really arguing on the facts. So this is not a debate in halacha. This is simply a debate in biblical exegesis, how to decipher and interpret these psukim. So, and now that you've read Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, at least me, you have a hard time seeing it the other way. But the bottom line is that you have a scenario when one might be observing a single carbon for multiple Shabbos, and sometimes the carbon for each Shabbos. And this concludes this little sub-segment of the Gemara, a biblical proof to the fact that there are different configurations, different methods, and arrangements of how a person might do teshuvah by bringing a chatas for the inadvertent desecration of Shabbos. And now let us continue. Our Mishnah then goes on to say that what happened, there's a difference if a person knows about that today is Shabbos, but he doesn't know the malachos, he forgot, or he doesn't realize, that certain activities are prohibited. So the Gemara asks the question, Maishna Reisha, Maishna Seifa. What is the difference between a time that a person brings a single carbon for multiple acts on a single Shabbos. And what's the difference with the latter clause, where he knows about today's Shabbos and he just doesn't know which malacha, wherein he has to bring a carbon for every active action he does. Rashi. The Shigigas Shabbos, when a person doesn't know today's Shabbos, Vizadain malachais, but he knows that his writing, for example, is a malacha, but he didn't know Shabbos. He would bring a single carbon for the entire Shabbos. Seifa, the Zadin Shabbos, malachais. But in the case where a person knows today is Shabbos, but he forgot that writing and erasing and building and carrying and lighting fires and putting them out, he forgot that those are Shabbos prohibitions. Then he would end up bringing a carbon for each of those activities. And the Gemara says, why? What's the difference? By the way, folks, we are now on page 70A. Ayin Amud Aleph, a big accomplishment for our Gemara Shir. What's the math? Almost 140 pages. Mark, what is it? 138?
I was muted. 138 because remember there's no base.
Right. Yeah. Mark and I, and I know to defer to you with this calculation. So why sometimes one carbon for Shabbos and sometimes a carbon for every single desecration? What's really the reason? So now we're going to use Svara and we're going to go through a few different explanations. Rav Safra proposed as follows. When the person brings a single offering for all of the desecrations done on a single Shabbos, because he forgot about Shabbos, Miyadias Shabbos hu Pirish. His activity is indicative of a lapse in the awareness of the whole Shabbos. Rashi. Reisha ki amru lei Shabbosu. Rashi explains this better than I would have, of course. In the first segment, where he forgot it is Shabbos, one word, one awareness will pull the plug on all of the acts of desecrating Shabbos. Ki amru lei Shabbosu. As soon as he finds out that today is Shabbos, Pirish min hamelacha umakir shechata. He says, oh, he pulls his hands back, he drops his shears and his iPhone. And what else is he doing? He drops everything. He says, oh, Givald, I forgot it's Shabbos. Umakir shechata. He knows he made a mistake. He knows he sinned. Valkach maybe carbon. So he's going to bring a carbon for the single item that removes him from Shabbos observance. Hilkach shi'ga Shabbos. Therefore, we look at this like, what was his mistake? That he didn't know today was Shabbos. And so it is the failure to know that today is Shabbos that forces him to bring a carbon. The Gemara is going to bring other explanations, so don't get too married to this exact structure, but this is an important thing to consider. It's all about what he knew. He didn't know it's Shabbos, and as soon as he knows it's Shabbos, he's back in Shabbos business. I mean, not doing business, but observing Shabbos. But how do you get the guy who doesn't know about malacha to stop doing what he's doing? So when you tell the guy who's shearing the sheep and writing with a pen and stirring the fire, you say, hey, it's Shabbos. The guy says, good Shabbos. He doesn't know that shearing and the fire and the writing, whatever else he's doing, is a malacha. The Hanami Yadi, he knows it's Shabbos. No, Rabbi, maybe you didn't get a chance to go to Hebrew school or Jewish day school. But you're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbos. He says, oh, and he drops the match. And he's saying, you're also not supposed to write, and he drops the pencil. And you're also not supposed to shear, he drops the shears. And so he needs to be informed, says Rashi, according to Rav Safra's explanation, on the nature of each malacha before he stops doing it. Hilkach al minyan ha-malacha is yavai. Therefore, when he brings an atonement, it's for each item that he did not know or that he forgot. Amarle Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says this is a little bit troublesome, a little problematic. Klum Peresh me Shabbos ela mishum melachais. In truth, what about Shabbos? Is a person withdrawing? It's all about melachais. Rashi. Klum Peresh me Shabbos ela mishum. The idea Shabbos to hikr shechat ala malachas. When you tell him Shabbos, all of a sudden his mind he goes, huh? Writing, fire. He goes through each of the malachas in his mind. V'luklum parish malachas. Lema idea dias malachas. El mishum Shabbos. The chiyam malachas saying hikr shechil Shabbos. Even when you tell the guy, what are you writing? What flashes through his mind is, oh, it's Shabbos. And so basically, Rav Nachman says, and I'm struggling a little bit with the way Rashi explained it, is that ultimately, although maybe in his mind he has two different ideas, it's really one single idea. Let's read Rabbi Stein's. Does he desist due to Shabbos for anything other than knowing that the labor is prohibited? If he didn't know the malacha is prohibited, telling him that it's Shabbos would not cause him to stop. And so what the knowledge that goes through the mind is the same in each. Similarly, he does this from before malacha when he knows Shabbos because he knows Shabbos. Again, let's read it. Klum parish mishabbos on mishum malachos. The only way he actively disengages from Shabbos desecration is knowledge of malacha. The klum parish malachos on mishum Shabbos, and the only reason why he disengages from these behaviors is because it's Shabbos. So Rav Nachman says they're too intertwined to differentiate between a yediyah of Shabbos and a yediyah of malacha, because really it is synonymous. So Rav Nachman gives another explanation. Again, just to explain. Our Gemara wants to know why sometimes one malacha for Shabbos, sometimes multiple malacha for Shabbos. We had one explanation. Rav Nachman doesn't like it, so he gives another explanation. Korban dechayev rachamona amai. We're talking about a chatas offering. A chatas offering is brought for a shgaga, for a mistaken desecration of Shabbos. Why does he bring that carbon? Ashgaga, for something he didn't know. Hasam chada shgaga. Here, when he forgot that it was Shabbos, there's a single lapse of knowledge. There's a single mistake. He didn't know today was Shabbos. That's the whole mistake. Hacha, tuva, shgagais, havyan. Bottom line, when a person was unaware of the different laws of Shabbos, his mistakes are in multiple spaces. Rav Nachman sounds like he's saying something very similar to Rav Safra. But Rav Safra is describing it as what piece of information causes him to desist. Rav Nachman just turns it around to be focusing on the mistakes that he has made. So awareness is just what makes you stop this thing. But the main story, the main issue is shgaga, mistake. And so that's the perspective we need to consider. Again, to me, and I'm sure to you, they sound quite similar, and they are quite similar, but it's really a small distinction, but it's very important, according to Ramach. Let's see a little more, and then we're going to call it a day.
Rabbi, is what's going on here that he forgot it's Shabbos versus he forgot that particular malacha?
Yes, or series of malachas. Yes. All right. All right, we're going to start the next Gemara. We're probably going to stop in the middle. In honor of Sunday Rosh Chodesh, there's a few things I need to take care of. But before we go on to the next Gemara, I just want to remind our dear friends, I'm going to post on the group, that tomorrow we have a bar mitzvah in Shul at 9:30. And first of all, if you want to come join us, Mark, I don't know if you're open for Rosh Chodesh minyan at 9:30, but I need some help getting a minyan for them. So if you're able to come, that would be wonderful. But because of that, I do have to cancel tomorrow's shir, and I'm sorry. It's likely that I might be available at some point, but I don't want to keep everybody guessing. And so Baruch Hashem, if we're only canceling the shir for Simchas, that's good. So again, just to notify you up front that tomorrow there's a bar mitzvah in Shul, so there will not be a Gemara shir. We
can quote the Talmud that the wedding takes precedence over the funeral on the road.
Well, this is not a funeral.
No, but a simcha versus negative.
So maybe I don't want to. Maybe bli neder. I'll leave a vart, something on the
tomorrow. It's the bar mitzvah versus the shiva minion, so you have a
right. True. So maybe bli neder, if I remember, I'll leave at least a vart. I'll leave something on the WhatsApp group so that we're not left without a Torah thought on Rosh Chodesh Elul.
Are we going to be on the? We'll be on the other one on Thursday because of the women's, or that?
I'm sorry.
Me. Usually after Rosh Chodesh Thursday, there's a women's share, but there isn't this.
Let me keep you posted. There may be some additional disruptions late this week and next week, so I'll keep you posted.
But we could use the alternate. You have an alternate.
No. If there's going to be a disruption, it's not because of that share. It'll be because I'll be traveling a bit, and so I need to see my schedule. I have to go to New York for a few days for good reasons. But
we can be tough on you. They have internet in New York. Also, just kidding.
No, that's what I'm saying. I have to see my schedule.
I'm sure you're on the road. It's not
no, I have to see. I have some appointments. I have to see my schedule, and then I'll know. I'll keep you posted. All right, dear friends, we're in the final moments of this year, but if we might be very lucky. We have with us our let's let his audio connect. We might be very lucky today because we're being joined by our Gabbai Emeritus. He left us. Okay, no. All right, Chayiv al kol malacha malacha. Our Mishnah says that when a person's lapse of knowledge is the nature of the malachos, he is chayiv al kol malacha malacha. Now he has to bring a chatos for each malacha, chiluk malachos. So the Gemara asks a very powerful question. And the question is a simple but important one. Chiluk milachos minalan. Since when are the different acts that desecrate Shabbos considered different sins, warranting separate karbanis? Chiluk melacha minalan. Where do we derive that the division of labor warrants different karbanis? Even if they were done in a single lapse of realizing that it's Shabbos, that it was desecrating Shabbos. Let me read Rabbi Stein's also his elaboration. What is the source of the halacha that if one performs numerous prohibited labors on Shabbos in the course of one lapse of awareness, each prohibited labor is considered a separate offense in regards to punishment? Usually, usually, in the observance of a mitzvah or the desecration of a mitzvah that warrants a tshuva, an atonement, there might be multiple acts of breaking that mitzvah, and one would yet only be responsible for a single carbon, unless there was awareness in between, as the Gemara is going to elaborate. Amar Shmuel, Amar Kra. So Shmuel says the pasuk describing Shabbos desecration says, and we read it over here. No, not here. Sorry. Here. Ushmartem es Shabbos. Those who desecrate it are put to death. Okay. The verse says, hypothetically, the Torah indicates that there could be multiple death sentences for a single malacha. Rashi.
How can you do multiple death sentences?
Good question. So let's read everything. Although several violations were committed in the course of a single lapse of awareness, each is considered a separate offense with regards to punishment. You know, it's actually a thing, and it happens. You follow the law. Occasionally, a person is prosecuted, and they're given multiple death sentences, death penalties. Now, obviously, you can't, or multiple life sentences. Obviously, a person can only lose. A person has but one life. What's the famous saying? My only regret is that I have but one life to give for my country, or something to that effect. Who said that?
Nathan Hale.
Oh, yes. Revolutionary.
No Canadian would say that.
No, this was an American hero of the Revolutionary War. I'm sorry? We have Machlokes. Nathan Hill, I think we said. All right. So the Torah talks that there could be multiple acts, multiple punishments, hypothetically, for Misa, even in one moment of Shabbos. So the Gemara says, "Hi, b'mezid siv." This is being taught about mezid. It may not in the mezid, but it can't really apply to mezid because, as a wise man once asked, how does a person die more than once?
Coward.
See, it does not refer to intentional transgressions. So, so apply this to a inadvertent mistake. What does death mean? There is an atonement for what would otherwise be a death sentence by giving money. Money, what's money? Rashi says, La frushe karbanis. We mean to bring a carbon. And so therefore, the Torah teaches us that it's possible, it's conceivable that in a single moment of Shabbos desecration, without really coming to his senses about any of them, a person could have to bring multiple karbanis. Now, interestingly enough, I took Mark's words and said a person can't die twice, and I projected it onto the Gemara. But let's go back. Im einay ingin lemezid. What did Rashi say? Im einay ingin lemezid. Rashi didn't say anything. What did Rabbi Steinzal say? If it doesn't refer to matters of intentional transgression, because the pasuk doesn't teach the halacha of shegeg. All right, whatever. And Tosfos says, "V'lema." Why don't we say explicitly? Im einay ingin lemezid. Mishum de'atu betray katala katlaslei. Can a person be killed twice? So Tosfos says exactly Mark's words. Shlemar the ilav krachina the ma'asam kuna leilahai krav lemezid. Okay. So Tosfos has a reason why he doesn't say it, but ultimately he makes that point. Okay. Let me explain this Gemara again. I'm sorry. It's describing Mezid, but it can't teach us a lesson of Mezid. The Gemara says, why can't it teach us a lesson about Mezid? Because we already have another pasuk that says we're already taught about that. So the Gemara says we are compelled to project and apply this to Shoigi. Tosfos says the Gemara could have given a better answer. And the better answer would have been, you can't kill a person twice. And so Tosfos answers, you need ultimately two psukim. Now that we have two psukim, we can look at the multiple deaths and read it literally. Otherwise, the Gemara would have said that Mois Yumas, that's just an expression, right? Mois Yumas, surely he shall die. Although Mois Yumas literally would mean die, like a double die. But until we have a second verse, which frees this up to be read more carefully, and we see that there are multiple deaths, but we see that it's not teaching us a chiddush about Mezid, so we applied to Shoigig, we wouldn't have learned it. But Tosfos asked a good question, and that's Mark's question. All right, that's today's Gemara. And ultimately what we see over here is that there are multiple karbonis to be brought in the context of Shabbos for multiple mezids, even if they happen in the same Shabbos, in the same general lapse of awareness that the person is actively desecrating Shabbos in multiple ways. The Gemara is not done. The Gemara is going to go a little further in this discussion, but we're going to call it a day. I want to wish my dear friends a good Chodesh. We're going to have to resume Be'ezer Hashem on Tuesday. But again, Bli Neder, if I remember, I will put a voice note on the Chabura group, so we'll have some Torah thought to tide us over. As we enter the month of Elul, we commemorate the 40 days that Moshe Rabbeinu was up on the mountain securing our atonement, and we relive that by securing deepening our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Hashem in the month of Elul. And the Baal Tanya, the Alter Rebbe writes, it's like a king who greets his subjects graciously and joyfully, because Hashem wants and seeks our closeness, and Hashem makes himself accessible. And so it's like a 30-day shopping spree in the mall. You can grab whatever you want. All you got to do is take it, but it's regarding our relationship with Hashem. So the anxiety is not the fear of trouble, but the fear of missed opportunity.
So I'm lucky being up in the mountains. I'm already at the first step.
Oh,
In the shul here over the Aron Kodesh, we have SOA now.
beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. So you're already living the dream.
Shekoyach, Rabbi.
All right, Shkoyach. Have a good day. Good Chodesh. Thank you all.
Ken Yerbu. Good Chodesh.
Amen. Take care.